Welcome to the next brand new football episode of Home Visit with Tyler Siskey and the Associates, and joined always by my two guys, DJ Eliot and Eddie Gran. How we doing today, guys?
Great.
Awesome. Great day. Great Monday. Oops.
Well, it's Monday. I've actually started changing my whole mindset. Monday's I always try to attack it like it's a Friday. So I wake up, everybody else is down. I wake up, let's go, it's Monday, even though it's really not. But I attack it like it's a Friday. Let's go get it. So brand new Monday morning, fresh off the weekend, we're getting our football season ready to go. Can y'all believe in 13 days we got college football?
It's crazy.
Next
Crazy,
weekend.
man.
Not this
Crazy.
weekend, but next weekend. It's ready
Crazy.
to go.
It's right around the corner.
You know what we're going to do next week, by the way, is we're going to have, I think there's 5 college games next weekend. And so we're going to have, NFL's having their preseason. We're going to have our preseason. So we're going to go through the picks, but it's going to be preseason. They won't count towards the rankings and all that stuff. So we'll do that. We'll do that next week. But, what I want to start with is news last week. And this is Home Visit, and we like to talk about how things affect recruiting and things like that before we get on to our, breakdown of the Big Ten and ACC this week. I want to talk about the NIL a little bit and the sheer genius that occurred in Utah last week with BYU and what they did. For fans that don't know, a company came in to a team meeting with BYU, and what they did was they put every single they paid for tuition and paid for school for all 36 of their walk-ons. Now, I want you to think about this. That means 36 plus 85. Now, I am from Alabama, okay? But by the old math, that's 121 kids that are now technically on full scholarship. And just as well as I do, if BYU's doing it, it's just a matter of time till everyone else is doing it. We'll start with you, DJ. What did you get from that?
Well, I think that, like you said, that's ingenious because now you're giving yourself a real advantage. Now you're adding numbers. Okay. Now you're adding guys on the roster that can help you practice as much as give you depth. You're going to get guys that are going to walk on that are players that could be scholarship players somewhere else because they know that there's a scholarship waiting for them in a different way at BYU. And BYU is one of those schools, like Notre Dame, that a lot of kids grow up, if that's your background, dying to go to. So they'll be willing to give up scholarships somewhere else to go play there. It reminds me of Nebraska back in the day. Nebraska had a program where the counties in Nebraska would pay for one kid in each county in Nebraska to be a walk-on at Nebraska. And Tom Osborne had a developmental program back then that was incredible. And they said that his scout teams were like 3 or 4 deep. And they would just, instead of bringing a card out there and showing the card to the next play to the scout teams, they would just run a whole nother team out there. And they were able to practice and develop their players because they had so much depth with that county scholarship system that they had in place there. I think that it's great because there's going to be more student athletes that are going to have opportunities to get their school paid for. But I also think that there may be a shift in college football where it goes back to a developmental league, and there's going to be better players that wouldn't even made it to this level because of this.
Yeah. What about you, Eddie? I know you saw it come across. I know you told me how much of an ingenious idea it was. What was your take from it?
Yeah, what's funny? I said it was brilliant, and 2 names that I put down is kind of like what DJ said. I had Nebraska and Alabama, Bear Bryant. When he wanted somebody and he didn't want to play against that person, he invited him to come be a walk-on because he didn't want to play against that person. And I think the developmental part that DJ talked about is huge. I think depth, when you talk about depth nowadays, especially with the transfer portal, and maybe you have that year where if you have 3 or 4 kids leave and you're maybe not at that 85, now you've got a way to combat that with walk-ons that are getting scholarships that, like DJ said, that might not go somewhere, but they're going to go to BYU.
Right, and that's the thing with me is and we talked about the Bear Bryant rule, and and it's not, if people go and look up the Bear Bryant rule in the NCAA manual, it's not going to show up as the Bear Bryant rule. But basically what Bear did back in the, 60s, 70s, 80s, is he was taking scholarships on campus. So he was taking track scholarships, baseball scholarships, whatever. And so he would, instead of using his football scholarships, he was giving those kids scholarships. They were on the football team, and he had, basically, if he didn't want to play against you, you went on scholarship, at his place, and that's how they became Alabama and so on and so forth, right? And then what happened is the NCAA came in and they said, look, there's kind of a pecking order with scholarships. So, for example, as obviously us three know, but the fans may not, is you're restricted to 85 scholarships on your football team. Okay, if a track scholarship athlete, so let's say somebody that's running the 100 meters really fast, if you decide to play him on Saturdays, he now counts as one of the football 85 scholarships. Okay, he no longer counts towards track. And so football's at the top of the mountain. So any scholarship athlete on campus in another sport that decides to play football, once they step on the field in competition, let me make that part clear. Once they step on the field in competition, now make up part of the 85. And so I've been a part of some unique discussions over the years where we had athletes come and you would allow them to walk on, but you're not ever going to play them until, by gosh, that they're going to play if you're close to the 85 and you're on that number, because it can get you. We had a little issue at Troy actually when I was a student assistant my very first year with a track athlete that played like 2 reps on kickoff return in a game that was out of hand and it was inconsequential, and we ended up losing a scholarship the next year because of it. So that's something that with BYU, with this rule, and DJ, like you were saying, what's to keep Nebraska from opening that program back up?
Right.
I guarantee you Scott Frost is on the phone this morning to every county, whoever organized that. I bet they're getting that back right now.
And one reason why that was good too, Tyler, was they never had to give an in-state kid a scholarship. That scholarship could be used for somebody else. They never had the top 5 in-state players that were good enough to play at Nebraska. They would be on county scholarship anyway. So they could.
Good point.
Yeah, they could use it somewhere else. You know what I mean? An interesting thing that you just said about the track scholarships counting towards the 85 is that's how Butch Davis, when Miami went on probation, used some of those to try to rebuild his football program with a scholarship reduction, because he wasn't allowed to get to 85. And so they had, I think it was Santana Moss wasn't even on football scholarship. I think he was on track scholarship.
I remember that.
Because they had reduced their number into the 60s. And so they were using some of those tactics that Bear Bryant used to use because they were on scholarship reduction with their probation. And they had all kinds of interesting things that they were doing to get up to 85. I mean, they had offensive linemen on academic scholarship, and that wasn't counting because they weren't at 85.
Right.
This may also help some teams that are struggling to get to 85. One of the biggest issues from the school I was working at last is that they haven't been able to get to 85 scholarships. We were operating in the 60s, and you're only allowed to sign 25 kids a year, and you're losing however many seniors, and if you have any attrition at all, you just can't catch up. So you're always playing under scholarships. And this may be an opportunity for some of those schools to catch up and be able to get the roster right too.
I don't know if you guys remember this, but when I went to Ole Miss with Coach Tuberville, Senator Tuberville now. So we go there, Deej and Tyler, and we're on probation, and we almost get, it's not the death penalty, but that's how we went into this job. And our first year we had 12 scholarships that we could sign, and the second year we had 13. You both know how that's devastating to a program when everybody else is signing 25. So they came up with the Tommy Tuberville rule. It was really good what he did. We went out and signed that year about 40 players. On February 3rd, or whenever that first week of February was, on signing day, we went out to every single Ole Miss person that had a son, and we said, okay, we're going to green shirt you, we're going to red shirt this one, we called it a yellow shirt or a blue shirt. So what we did was we said, after 1 year, you're going to get on scholarship. After 2 years, you're going to get on scholarship. And I bet you there was probably 3 of those kids that played in the NFL that their parents said, you know what, we got to get Ole Miss back. They paid for their first 2 years or their first year, and then we supplemented it with a scholarship. But after we did that, they had the Tommy Tuberville rule, and there was no more signing those numbers. You know,
I believe my good friend Matt Luke was one of those guys.
That's absolutely true.
You know, he's told me that story.
His parents were unbelievable, and to allow us to do that, we ended up getting some good players from it.
I miss the hell out of Coach Luke's parents now. They would one of the great things by him being the head coach is, you know, we would have, you know, staff, you know, meals, you know, on Monday nights, and his mom would cook. I'm talking about red beans and rice. His mom, Miss Luke, she can cook, and I miss them to death. That's the hard part when you leave, or you know, if things happen, is you miss the people that you're with every day because they become such your, you know, like your family. But she can cook too. Let me explain that. She can get it. If you can't tell, I'm still carrying the weight that I ate when she started. So, but yeah, you know, that's the thing. You know, where I get frustrated, and we're going to get to the NCAA investigations next, but you know, where I get frustrated a lot of times with like these rules that come across. So it's like the transfer, you know, right now the NCAA is usually they'll hit you with like one rule that changes the way everything goes down. They give you like 6 or 7 years before they hit you with another one. But they really hit at the same with the transfer portal, you know, allowing, you know, it was transfer portal, then immediately, you know, 2 or 3 years after it was, hey, let's go back to getting, you know, free transfers with the NIL in the same year. I mean, it's just the lack of, I mean, this is changing football. I mean, this is changing the game. We're going backwards, you know, we're going back in time 40 years, you know, with this. And so that's sometimes I wish we'd do a little bit more thinking and put some things in place to eliminate. But this is really going to be, this is great for BYU right now, but this rule right here and what they did is going to spurn the rich getting richer. That's all it's going to do. It'll eventually, you know, pan itself out. But, you know, DJ, back to your point too, I don't think the general public understands how difficult it is when you're coming off penalties or things like that to get back to the 85 when you're down numbers. Or a lot of times as coaches, when you go into a situation, you're down numbers. And I think it's just going to get worse. I don't think it's going to get better. You know, we actually were talking about this a couple of weeks ago, is you're going to have, like, let's say if you're a group of 5 coach. Let's say Billy Napier, okay? Billy Napier is going to get a Power 5 job sooner rather than later, okay? It's just a matter of time, right? He's being very selective. He's very happy they're taking great care of him, but somebody eventually is going to do enough to get him to that level. Well, he's going to take half his team with him. You know, why sign? You know how hard it is when you know, we've all been there. When you go into a job in December, how hard it is to get your class together in that short period of time. So you're going to see these coaches that are leaving these jobs start portaling guys immediately from their old school, and then the new coach is going to be down numbers. You know, I often get criticized by my favorite Ole Miss fans up here about how young we went in my only class here, which was the 2019 class. Why didn't you go get more JUCO guys? Or why didn't you go get more, you know, transfer guys, all that stuff? We had to get younger to get back to the 85. That was the only way.
That's exactly right.
You know, people, when you're down numbers and you go and you add portal guys, that's putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. That doesn't do anything.
Great point.
Go ahead.
That's the same situation we were here in Kansas. We got into Kansas, we got 60-some kids on scholarship. So if you think about it, you can only sign 25 a year, and a JC kid is only 2 years. That means if you're signing all JC kids, you're never going to have more than 50 kids on your roster because they're turning over every 2 years.
Yep.
And so we signed 3 straight classes of high school kids. And, you know, this past season, almost every one of our starters was a freshman or a sophomore. But it was to try to get back to the 85. You know what I mean? It was to try to get our roster back to the 85.
It's a very difficult situation. Everybody's like, you know, in hindsight is obviously 2020, right? But it's a very difficult situation for people to really understand, because you got to bite the bullet. And we say this on this show a lot before you guys go on, but taxes are going to be due at some point in time. And when you go, we had, so my first year when I got here, I was able to go back and actually use their penalties as a way to get some more scholarships, because they were only allowed the way that, you had initials and counters, all this stuff, all the rules. But long story short is I found a way to 31 scholarships, okay, in the first year. And so I knew that if we didn't go young, when you look at it, you're coming back and trying to get back to the 85. Like, if you don't get to 85, you're done. You have no chance. And people don't understand that. And playing is below 85 scholarships, you're playing with your hand behind your back. And so getting back to the 85, you had to sit down and you got two choices. You can either try to get back to the 85 and have a chance to win, but which is in our situation sucks, is you're recruiting for someone else. Because these days you don't have time to build anything anymore. And that's very frustrating when you're trying to, and we've all been through it, but in today's world, you got 2, maybe 3 years, and if you don't get it right, then it sucks.
Well, that's the reason Kansas was in the situation it was in. Is towards the end of previous head coaches' careers, they started thinking, "Hey, I got to win," and so they went junior college transfer, and then it messed the roster up here. Hey, another interesting point, Tyler, is with the new NIL rules. From my understanding, what BYU did, BYU doesn't have any state laws on NIL yet. Okay. So they're free to do whatever they want. And from my understanding, some of the states that have already implemented some laws, what BYU did would not be allowed in some of those states. Okay. So it's already showing some unequalness, because there is no NCAA definition on how NIL operates. And there are states that have already put in NIL laws, okay, that restrict some sort of name, image, and likeness for the student athletes. And I think I read that South Carolina and even Florida right now would not have been able to do this, what BYU did.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about. I don't know if it was last week, 2 weeks ago, whenever it was, 3 weeks ago. My brain's starting to spin a little bit. But the problem is like in recruiting right now, because that's where it's getting dumped on, I'm going to have to know 52 state laws, because you also got to know what you're recruiting against. And so trying to keep up with all this stuff, there's got to be a federal mandate or federal law. But again, at the same time, I understand that they got other things to deal with right now. If you're we're not going to get into politics, but from a politics standpoint, there's a lot bigger problems than NIL right now in this world. So they're not going to be in a hurry to do this. And it's just
Wild West right now. It's the Wild West.
Yeah. Right. And if I were at a state school that let me I would be drilling the eyes out. You take advantage while you can. It's kind of like when you get at the blackjack table, Eddie, and they're running hot. You got to double down. You got to press. You got to go. I mean, now the hot time is now. If you're in one of those states, you gotta strike while the iron's hot, and let's go get it. I mean, that's just what you got to do.
Yep.
Yeah, because eventually there'll be, I think, an NCAA rule. I think eventually there'll be an NCAA rule on NIL. But as well as I do, the NCAA is I mean, they're giving in to public pressure and anything right now, anything that's popular that they're going to give into. And there's been so many talks about people breaking away from the NCAA and all that. I think they just, I think they want to do what's popular. And like you said, too many new rules too soon has really changed the dynamics of college football.
Yeah, I think if I'm 100% with you. In my opinion, I think the NIL transfer portal, what we're going through right now, is the beginning of the end of the separation and going away. And if it doesn't happen, I don't think it will ever happen, because now's the time. I mean, like, with all the stuff going on, the whole point to me, and again, I've been at every level, just like you guys have, all over the place. But always the point for me with the NCAA is basically, it's kind of like NASCAR, right? Everybody's supposed to have equal opportunity to go out and compete. Okay, so there should, by the rule of the land, by all the rules, whatever the University of Alabama does, so Texas State has to follow this. Everybody has to follow the same guidelines and has all that stuff. Well, now with all these rules that are coming into play right now, we're making the rich richer. It's like the NCAA came in and basically did exactly the opposite of what the intention was. okay, with the NIL. We're making the rich richer, and we're making it harder for with the transfer portal and the NIL, okay? Because we all know that if you're running a company, you're not going to go and get the guy at Sam Houston State to represent your company, right? You're going to get the guy at Texas or wherever, right? And same thing with a portal. Now, those kids, you're getting them a free transfer. Now the group of 5 is just going to be a minor league system for the Power 5. Are their kids going to stay? Sure. Kids are going to want to stay with a coach and all those things. But for the most part, I mean, if a guy turns out he's going to be a first-round pick, like we were talking about a couple weeks ago, the first-round pick coming out of North Dakota State is probably not going to happen much anymore. The first-round pick coming out of Central Michigan, probably not going to happen much anymore. They're going to end up leaving and going, somewhere else to, because if you start getting recognized as a sophomore or junior as possibly being a guy, they're going to want to go get it on film to bump the draft status. So
not only that, they want to get their NIL money. Their name, image, and likeness money. They're going to want to get their, because they're not going to get it through their group of 5 school. You know what I mean? And now they've become popular. So now they can go to Alabama and then get all their NLI money. They can make their money before the NFL too. I talked to a group of 5 coach this year, and he said that signing high school kids is going to become a thing of the past for the group of 5, because with the transfer rule, you still have the old rule where you have to sit out if you transfer. So, if you transfer one time right now, you don't have to sit out. But if you transfer twice, you do have to sit out. Right. So group of 5 teams they're going more in the portal because their roster will not be allowed to transfer. So now if they get a player, let's say he was a freshman at Michigan and then he entered the portal and then he was signed at Texas State, right? And now this kid that ends up being a player, he can't transfer again without having to sit out. And so they're even going to get deeper into the portal so that they can avoid that problem of losing their great players as transfers.
Yeah, same way. I've talked to several of them that are thinking exactly along those lines. The only issue comes into, again, like we've talked about, roster management and staying at the 85, and going that heavy. And the other thing, recruiting-wise, that I can't wait to see is, it's like I've told several of my group of 5 buddies, I was like, the people that are getting lost in all this is the JUCO player. There's going to be, because you're looking at these big-time JUCO prospects, and I'm not saying that it's going to be across the board, but you're going to see it hit them to where you're going to see these big-time JUCO prospects. Why would Alabama, Clemson, all those big-time programs go recruit a junior college player that they know is talented, but hasn't done it at that level, instead of going to getting the portal guy that they've seen do it against, at that level and that structure and everything else, and been in that environment? You're going to see, because the Power 5 schools are going to lean on the transfer portal more than they are the JUCO kid because of the uncertainty. The group of 5 level, I think if they do it right, they can go get some really big-time players in the JUCO level, and in their program they usually could not get if they hit it hard. I think that can occur.
It's going to be interesting. 5 years with this transfer portal, that's where you want to see everybody's roster and say, okay, who managed it right and who didn't. You know what I mean? Because you're going to get that fluctuation of sophomores and juniors and seniors. And, when you used to be just high school and you plug in a JUCO once in a while, you can manage it. But now, you get these one-time deals and these two-time deals, then you better be really good at managing your numbers.
Yeah, because here's the thing, is like, obviously in my job, that was what I did, right? Roster manage and all that stuff. And my number, always had a number, was 18, right? So regardless, if you're healthy, like when I say healthy, you got a healthy roster, okay? And every year you're 85. 18, you had to take 18 high school kids every year, period. And you had 7 that you could mix and match. As long as your roster was healthy, you had 7 that you could mix and match with JUCO transfers and all that. Now, I did not count a JUCO player with 3 years of eligibility. I did not count him as a JUCO player. Let me make that clear. If you had a guy that had 3 years of eligibility, I counted him in that group of 18. So you basically had to have 18 players with 3+ years of eligibility to maintain an 85 healthy roster. Now, once I got to Alabama, okay, I spent the month of August at Alabama. I would be at practice and I will be watching those freshmen. Okay, I want to know who's probably going to be the 3-year player. Okay, because that affects your roster. And just like when I came to Ole Miss, back the second time, they had an issue at linebacker. Everybody's like, "Oh, you got to go sign this linebacker. You got to go sign this linebacker." Guys, you don't fix a position with a high school kid in a class. You got to fix your issues 2 and 3 years in advance so they're developed and ready to play. You can't. I mean, if you're recruiting and you're saying, "Hey, I'm going to solve my roster issue with a high school freshman," I don't care who he is. I don't care if it's the greatest high school player that ever lived. You're joking and kidding yourself. Because,
no doubt.
I mean, the probability of them hitting and saving your team is relatively almost zero. Does it happen? Sure, but you better not count on it because I don't know the percentage, but it doesn't happen very often. Those issues have to be fixed 2 and 3 years in advance. And so at Alabama, that was one of the hardest things I had to do was go in there and go, okay, this guy's probably going to be a 3-year guy. This guy's going to be a 3-year guy. And so you got to address that in that recruiting class that you're having now so they can be ready to go. It wasn't hard to figure out very long that Derrick Henry was going to be pretty good. Okay, everybody's like, well, how do you do that? It's not very hard. When you see Derrick Henry and you see guys like Ronnie Harrison, really Minka Fitzpatrick, Cam Robinson, really quick that those guys are probably going to be 3-year guys, and you got to prepare for that departure early. Does that make sense? So,
Tyler, when I was at Miami in the early 2000s, and Eddie can attest to this too, because Eddie was at Miami with a great run too. Our philosophy was don't redshirt anybody, and the reason is if they're a great player, you're only going to get 3 years out of them anyway, right? So if you redshirt them, then you only got 2 out of them. So play them on kickoff team, play them on punt return team, and then if they weren't good enough to leave after 3 years, then there's a chance they may transfer because that means they're not on the field.
Right.
You know what I'm
We
saying?
did a little bit of that at Florida State too, DJ.
That's exactly right, Eddie. We did.
I was the special teams coordinator, and I had a bunch of freshmen that were really good football players. And by the time you got to game 6, you knew whether or not they were going to be players or not, and helped in the 2 deep or even became starters. But if you're a special teams coordinator and you get to use all those athletes, it's a lot of fun.
it makes a difference, I know. But I'm with you. It's like, and that's the then as the let's say as the coaching carousel picked up steam in the 2000, really at the beginning of my career to where now, I mean, it gets shorter and shorter every year, the time that a coach has to be at a school. Hell, my saying was, I was like, hell, we redshirt them so the next guy can coach them? I mean, there's no, you look at, like I was talking about the other day, like you look at the SEC, there's only 2 coaches in this league in the SEC that have been there over 5 years ago. And that's Mark Stoops and Nick Saban.
Yeah.
So everybody else has just been redshirting for the next guy.
Exactly.
And it's just, you don't have time anymore. And so you don't have time to build anything anymore. And so as a coach, you're caught into this, realm of, okay, we have to, you can't sit here and go, hey, we got a plan for next year, we're going to be fired. Like that's not in a mindset. You have to plan to build something, but nobody's getting time to build something. And I think when you see, that's why I always I love when Kentucky is succeeding. I love that. Because how many years have we gone with teams like just panicking, like panic firing guys and getting them out of here? Well, you're starting over. And, when Mark got there Coach Stoops got there at Kentucky, I mean, how many years have they gone on with let's try this guy, and they just kept, they kept searching and the same results. And then they give the guy a chance. And you guys start building something to where now we're having a conversation last week where these guys are contenders for the East. Because you're giving somebody time to actually build something and, get their culture, get their guys in. And I'm just a big believer in that. Now, look, don't get me wrong. There is a time and a place. I'm with it. I get you. All right. But I think too many times we're pulling the trigger on some guys that, for whatever reasons, there are things that, regardless of what we do and what we say, every year half the teams are going to win. Every Saturday, half the teams are going to win and half the teams are going to lose. So it is what it is. All right, we're gonna move on. I know that was good. That was a good one right there. But we're gonna move on to one of my favorite topics that I've had to remain mum about for a long time, and that's NCAA investigations. And so this kind of popped up this past week. Baylor's penalties came through from the NCAA. I know you guys saw it. But that's really it's really not for me. It's not about the penalties and all that stuff. I know people got really irritated. Twitterverse and the fans were very upset that after 5 years of investigation, this is what they got hit with. 5 years of investigation. They got hit with 4-year probation and a $5,000 fine. And the only thing they really found after 5 years of investigating, the only thing that they found was that a player had been on academic probation because he was plagiarized on a paper, and then a couple months later cheated on a quiz, and he wasn't punished appropriately because he was on academic probation. That's what they came out with in 5 years. I don't even know what to say about that. I mean, I think we've all been there. I won't let y'all, because y'all may actually coach again, so I don't want to let y'all self-incriminate anybody. But look, I'll say it right now, and I'll take your silence as understanding. I don't care what school you're at. I don't care if you're at the lowest group of 5 school that's ever existed or the biggest Power 5 school of all time. To have that as your rule that you broke, I just started laughing. I mean, schools, like when I was at every school that I'm at, they self-report 40 and 50 violations a year. Okay, every school. And it's like, pocket dials, calling a kid, texting the kid too early before time, whatever it is, these real small violations. And you're telling me after 5 years, you hit me with an academic violation after a 5-year investigation? I'm speechless.
It's a joke. And you and I talked about this, because how does it take 5 years? That doesn't make any sense. And then if they did get a big-time penalty, now you're affecting the wrong staff. Now you're affecting kids on a team, new turnover of coaches, and now they're getting affected by something that lasted for 5 years. And then you look at, what happened at Penn State, and you look at how they got hammered, but then, they take 5 years for Baylor, and they get a slap on the wrist, What if they would have gotten hammered too? The problem is it took 5 years, and now the group that's in there, they're suffering. And that just makes no sense to me.
And, it's already, I think, started affecting them, because the anticipation of what the NCAA ruling was going to be affected their recruiting in the last few years as it was. You guys know as much as I do, is if that's looming out there, opposing teams are going to use that against you in recruiting to say, hey, you don't want to go there. You may have a bowl ban, or you may have a scholarship reduction, or you don't know what's going to happen. I read that Mark Emmert said the reason that they did not put NCAA violations on them for sexual harassment and misconduct was that they found that there was a fraternity president who did the same thing as the football player, and it was handled the same way, in the fact that it was not turned into Title IX. There was miscommunication. There were people that, tried to cover it up. So Mark Emmert ruled that there was no preferential treatment to the athletes. He said, obviously, Baylor has a sexual harassment problem campus-wide at that time. It wasn't just athletics. So I thought that was interesting, but it's still strange that it took 5 years to come up with that.
Yeah, and look, and here's and Eddie said it. Here's the major problem: is like you got people now. They're not on their. It's not the next staff. The guy that replaced the guy, he's gone too. Like they're on the staff after that, and now they're going to have to deal with things and all that. But here's the problem. And look, I was at example, okay, that and like which everybody wants me to talk about. I guess I'll talk about a little bit of it. All right, so I was at Ole Miss, okay? I was in the staff room when Hugh Freeze sent out the text message, basically challenged anybody that had anything. I remember what caused it. I guess we'll tell. This is not a big deal. So I guess we're statute of limitations up. There was a staff, an SEC staff, that turned us in to the SEC and the NCAA. And this is literally like right before signing day, okay? So they turned us in, and we had to answer. And it wasn't like it was just one of those deals and we've all been there, where they'll turn you in for something, you have to give a statement, right? And they accused us of paying for Laramie Tunsil to go to. We had him put up in New Orleans because it was Super Bowl weekends. What it was is that we were sending Laramie Tunsil to the Super Bowl, because the SEC school that we were recruiting against the SEC school for Laramie Tunsil services. Okay, and so what happened is we went down there on the Thursday before signing day, and he committed. Okay. And the kid, and he was with his girlfriend, and he said, the other school was coming in the next day. Okay. He's like, I don't want to see them. I just want to be done with it. I'm tired of everything. I want it to be over with. So I believe it was Chris Kiffin came up with the idea is like, hey, look, just don't go to school tomorrow. It's on a Friday. So he left his cell phone at the house, and him and his girlfriend actually were, I guess, hiding in plain sight. He lived next door to a park. He went to the park and sat in the park all day long and hung out with his girlfriend at the park. But that team accused us of paying for him to go to – he was in New Orleans for the Super Bowl, I guess, with Archie and all of our New Orleans connections, which was completely false because we knew where he was. He was in the park across the street. And so that really irritated Hugh. So he sends out the tweet, says, hey, if you got anything on us, he sends out that, and then here it comes. Here they come, right? And in that case, they were there in like a month. They didn't play around. They came, of course, everybody in America sent out, poor old Julie and and Matt Paul compliance. Freeze puts the compliance email in there, and they just start getting hammered, everything from like real accusations to basically go screw yourself. They got trolled and everything else in that email. So that happened, okay? Now, I want to remind you, like on March the 13th was my first day at Alabama. This is like at the end of January, start of February. So less than 6 weeks later, I was going to Alabama. They actually started interviewing people for that case the week before I left, okay? And so I go to Alabama. Never got interviewed, by the way. I go to Alabama. I run recruiting in Alabama. I leave there. I want to coach. I go on the field at South Alabama. So I'm at South Alabama. And then I come back to Ole Miss with Matt Luke to run recruiting, and the penalties are still going on. Like it was crazy because it takes so long. I literally had been at 2 other universities. Everybody was gone that had anything to do with anything. The kids are completely different, and we're sitting here having to wait on appeals and they were trying to hit us with some unofficial visit deal that had nothing to do with the issues. And in the Ole Miss case, I guess the most frustrating thing for me in the Ole Miss case is we all know, okay, coaches know who's cheating, and coaches know what they're doing. The other schools are doing all that stuff. And they hit Ole Miss with somebody sleeping on a coach's couch and some kind of unofficial visit thing, right? But they hammered them because they had a feeling that something was going on. They just couldn't prove it. Does that make sense? So we've all been there, and I always like to say this. Ole Miss was like, it's like driving on the interstate. Ole Miss was in the right-hand lane. They had the cruise control set on 75. Speed limit 70, but they had the cruise control set on 75 in the right-hand lane. Now, on the left-hand lane, all these schools are going, choom, 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 175 miles an hour down the left-hand lane. But the police decided to pull behind Ole Miss and throw them in jail for going 75 instead of giving them a warning. That's what happened. So, but the problem is, and DJ, I say all that to say this. I know everybody's probably waiting for me to talk about that on this podcast, so I just said some of it. But here's the problem is, so when I come back, having to recruit, and this is what Tennessee's going to have to do, and this is what Arizona State's about to have to do. Having to recruit during those times at a high level is very difficult. Because just what you said, Eddie, if you're at Kentucky, which you may or may not have, and it was you and Ole Miss, and we're under that deal, would you use it in recruiting?
Absolutely. No
I mean,
brainer.
DJ, would you?
Definitely.
I mean, every coach would. Because it's like, which is the greatest thing about coaching, in my opinion. We're all good friends, but in recruiting, it's like there's no love lost in recruiting. People pull all kinds of stuff, right? But that's what people don't understand is it's very difficult. Everybody's like, well, why couldn't you get that guy? I'll tell you why we couldn't get that guy, because of this. And they're like, oh, the penalties were over in November. When you're recruiting big-time prospects, the match is won back in March. It's not won in November, December. So that's my 2 cents on that. I hate that I bored you guys to tears with that, but that gets me fired up.
No, you're exactly right. The fact that it takes so long, it really affects a program in the long run because the recruiting is going to be hammered by the opponents for as long as those allegations are looming. They're going to use it against them. And just like we just said, Baylor, it took 5 years. I mean, for 5 years, people were hammering them.
Yeah, and you don't think that, and that's what, like, I want to give, like, Matt Rule some credit. Like, do you know how hard that was to function in that time, in that period of time? I mean, to even give him a team to be competitive, it's amazing. You know, it's just, golly. And he didn't have anything to do with it. You know, it's just, it is what it is. So I know we're not going to, I don't want you guys to make coach again, so y'all don't need to say anything else to get you guys in trouble. So we'll move on. All right, so let's go. What we're here for today. We're gonna move on to. Let's talk about. We're gonna start with the Big Ten. I want to finish with the ACC. So let's start with the Big Ten. All right, and the DJ, I'll start with you today. Big Ten surprise team. Let's talk a little bit about before we even talk about the teams. Let's talk a little bit about the Big Ten. Where do you think the Big Ten? How many teams do we got in the Big Ten that we need to be looking for this year?
How many teams do you think will be contenders this year?
Yeah. How many contenders do you think you got?
Well, obviously Ohio State. You know, you talk about Ohio State. Ohio State's, you know, going to be in there, and they got a shot to win a national championship. And then, you know what I think is interesting about the Big Ten is you got the East and the West, and you got on the East side you got Ohio State, you got Michigan, you got Michigan State, you got Penn State. Okay, all on the East side, and then on the West. You got, you know, Wisconsin, you got Nebraska, you got Illinois, you got Purdue, you got Northwestern, you got Indiana over there. Traditional powers are all on the East. You know what I'm saying? And I've always thought that was interesting, the way that that's divided up. Now, traditional powers don't always equal the best team. You know, the teams that have tradition don't always equal the best team. But I've always thought that was interesting. And that's really, I think, benefited Wisconsin, a team like Wisconsin, because they get into the Big Ten championship game a lot because they're over there on the west side. I think Ohio State is a national championship contender. I don't know that there's another team in the Big Ten that is. Okay, and as far as teams that I think, you know, could improve, I mean you're going to see teams like Penn State. I think are going to be better. You know, I think Penn State is going to make a run and start playing up to their expectations, I think, eventually. I think, you know, teams like Wisconsin somehow always are competitive, okay, and always, you know, are right there as a 2 or 1 or 3 loss team. You know, their style of play, I think, put them in position to play. Again, their advantage of being on the West puts them in position to play. I think it'll be interesting to see if any of these teams, you know, can even give Ohio State a run for their money. You know, I don't see it happening, but I think it'll be interesting.
All right, don't tell me your surprise teams and all that stuff yet. We're gonna go to Eddie and let him talk a little bit about the Big Ten. Then we're gonna come back, and then we'll get your predictions. All right, Eddie, go ahead. A little bit about the Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a ton about the conference except that I've played against Penn State. I've played against Ohio State at some of the schools that I was at, and I think DJ said it in terms of that west side. It's easier, and Wisconsin, because of their type of play, and they're in it every year, it seems like, and they're just consistent. But you know, nobody's proven right now. It used to be Michigan a little bit, but they've fallen off so much that somebody that can contend with Ohio State, I just don't see it right now as well. I do have some surprises and some contenders when we get to that, but at the end of the day, it's Ohio State until somebody beats them. That's what I think.
I think, which we'll get to that here in just a second. I think this is the year that we have that. And I will get to that. But I'm with you. I think that, again, no surprise here. I think the East is completely loaded. When I say loaded, relatively loaded in that league. I think it's a two-team race in the West between Iowa and Wisconsin. And in the East, you got, in my opinion, I'll call it a 3.5 team race. I think you got, some guys there, but I do think week in, week out, from depth perspective, it's definitely a East side heavy conference. But I will say this: I do think, it's enough in the league, that whoever comes out, if you get somebody that comes out the winner, I do think they'll end up in the college football playoff. I think not even if they're not, but just because the selection committee is not going to leave out a Big Ten winner off of the deal, So I think out of the playoffs. So we'll see there. All right, let's go. DJ, we'll start back with you. Let's go Big Ten surprise team. Who you got?
I'm going with Northwestern. Even though that they made it, to the championship game last year, they're not traditionally a contender. And so they have one of the easiest schedules in college football this year. And I think that they're really going to reap the rewards of the super senior rule with COVID. They're going to have, because of that, they're going to have almost all their starters back. Okay. And, they find a way to win. They have a style of play that works for them. They have great discipline, and they're a team that I think, like we talked about the old Nebraska teams that are a developmental league, and the fact that they're going to have so many super seniors come back, and the fact that those guys know exactly what they're doing, and they play hard, and they play for each other, I think that they're going to surprise some people.
All right, Eddie, surprise team, Big Ten.
I've got two. I've got Indiana. I think they got some wide receivers that came in and transferred. I think the defense has been solid. Quarterback's going to be an issue, but I think the head coach is a rock star. And
my guy.
I just think he is really, really a big-time coach. Those kids will play for him. And so I don't think it was a fluke. And then on the west side, I like Minnesota. I think, the running back's back, quarterback, and I think their O-line is solid. They're going to have to play better defense. But those are my surprise teams in Big Ten.
My surprise team, I'm glad, hey, and this is not even for content. That's what everybody needs to know. These are three different teams, and we didn't talk ahead of time, so this is not even for a good show. My surprise team may contend to try to win this thing, and they always get left out, year in, year out, is the Iowa Hawkeyes. Last year, in a COVID year, they lost the very first two games of the year by combined 5 points. They lost one by 4, one by 1. And then they rolled off 5 straight after that, okay? They didn't get to play Michigan, got canceled because of COVID, and they didn't get to play in the bowl game because they got canceled because of COVID. So everybody's kind of leaving the Hawkeyes out. And I'm with you, DJ. I think teams like Northwestern Iowa is another one that I see. All these COVID seniors, they're going to have everybody back in a program that always develops kids. Hey, they're the and nobody talks about them because, again, what's different? He's been there for 1,000 years, okay? He's been developing players for a long time. And I don't even know, are they even in the top 70 in recruiting ever? And that's what they do. And I think, again, a developmental program, another year back from COVID. I'm kind of looking at the Iowa Hawkeyes, man. They got a good one out the gate, but I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with them this year. All right, DJ, we'll kick it back to you. Contenders. Let's just do this. Let's do contenders and who you think's going to win. The Big Ten. Let's go. Who you got, DJ?
I think the contender is Wisconsin. Like I talked about, their style of play, they're 2 or 3 series away from beating anybody. They run the ball, they control the clock, they play really good defense, and there's never a big spread in points on any of their losses. And I think Gran, their quarterback, is a stud. He came out his freshman year and really lit it up. Last year in COVID, did some good things. And I think that's a team that you're going to have to deal with. I think that any given week they can beat anybody. I think the winner, though, is obviously Ohio State. they always have good quarterbacks. I think C.J. Stroud, he's going to step in and just and play lights out there. The most talented team in the league. They're well coached. I mean, they've had very few games that have even been close in that league with them. So I think that, like I mentioned earlier, they're the only national championship contender in this league, and I think that they're going to win it again. I think they'll be in the playoffs.
All right, Eddie, contenders and winner.
Contenders, I've got Penn State and Iowa as my contenders.
Okay.
I had the same thing. Iowa 6-game win streak. Great quarterback play. I think this year, I think they'll contend, and I also think Penn State will. Last year, way too many turnovers. They'll get that fixed. If they take care of the football, they'll have a solid defense, and I think those will be the contenders. And I think at the end of the day, I think Ohio State wins the one side. Chris Olave is best I've seen. Their O-line is phenomenal. Wide receiver crew coming back. And then Wisconsin, I think if you get more explosives out of the Wisconsin offense, they didn't have a lot of explosives last year. We always looked for 1 out of every 8 plays to have a 16-yard pass or a 12-yard run. I think if they get that ratio right, I think they'll be a heck of a. I think they'll win that side, but I think at the end of the day, Ohio State wins that league.
All right, so my contenders, obviously, I think Penn State's going to be better. James Franklin, man, I tell people this all the time. I still think this guy's, he's a ball coach. What he did at Vanderbilt will never be duplicated ever again. Going to Penn State, getting back recruiting, he can recruit, he can coach ball. They're going to be back. Wisconsin, I'm doing the same thing. I'm a Gran fan. He'll be a third-year freshman, so that'd be interesting. He'll be eligible for the draft, being technically a freshman. He's he redshirted, got the COVID year back, so he's going to be technically a redshirt freshman again. But he is really good. He is an NFL dream because he's the best pro-style guy out there for next year's draft. We've talked about him a little bit in the past. Ohio State also a contender because my winner, going on a limb, I can't go. I rode them to like Zorro last year. I'm going to ride them like Zorro this year. Is the Indiana Hoosiers. I think what Tom was, and I gotta throw this out there too for all my guys. I'm very biased on this one because Tom's a real good friend of mine. I got like 6 or 7 guys I've worked with there, but they are not only recruiting well, they are evaluating their ass off. Okay, they are getting players that, for the first couple of years, got a lot of guys that nobody really wanted, and all of a sudden they're becoming stars, Freifo, all those guys. They actually got, in my opinion, they got the transfer from Auburn, Jaron Handy, okay, who was probably the most talented football player, or second, it was kind of a tie in the state of Mississippi that year that originally went to Auburn, who's now transferred up to Indiana with all those Indiana connections. Indiana, they're recruiting well, they're doing well, and you hit the nail on the head. Those guys play for him. They lose by 7 to Ohio State last year on the road. They have fans in the stands in October in Bloomington. Ohio State comes. This is the year. I don't know how. It makes no sense. I get it. When you look on paper, nobody's going to give them a chance. But you know what? Nobody gave them a chance last year either. And what's interesting, and I will say this, what I love the way he's doing is like a huge majority of the staff that's at Indiana was with us at Arkansas State when we got that thing going. And then a lot of them were at Ole Miss when we got that thing going, and now they're at Indiana. They got a blueprint that works, guys, and they're doing it. They're just doing it again in Indiana. And so Tom Allen is a rock star, like you said. I love him to death. Those kids will play for him. Indiana's my champ. That's what I'm going with. All right, so let's go over to the ACC. Okay, we can talk a little bit. This is a little bit more in our wheelhouse. I know Big Ten. I'm just an Indiana fan, so I got to pull for Indiana. But let's go to the ACC. I know we got some ACC in the house right here. Okay, you guys, I've never been in ACC. Just see them on TV. So here we go. ACC. Let's get your general thoughts. We'll start with you, Eddie. We'll get your general thoughts on the ACC before we come back to your winners, surprises, and contenders and all that stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah, it was fortunate to be in that league with DJ. And it's an interesting league. Right now you got Clemson that has kind of, taken over that league, where when you had, when they put everybody and they put this conference together, and you had Florida State and you had Miami, and everybody's kind of waiting for Miami, to be a powerhouse again. And I think that's what they thought. FSU has been down a little bit, and that's a little frustrating. Even Virginia Tech, a little bit down. And you had teams like Virginia, that was kind of the Indiana of that. They were making some noise, and you don't hear about Boston College. So I think the league is down a little bit, but hopefully maybe with some of these transfer portals and some of this stuff, and you look at North Carolina, what Mac's done, and now they're making some noise because they got a great quarterback over there, and I think Clemson's it's like Ohio State. Clemson is the king, but I think there's some interesting people when we get to talking about surprises and contenders. I think this league has some of those this year.
I agree. Go ahead, DJ. What you got?
I agree with Eddie. I mean, in the past, there's been some national championship teams that have come out of this league. You got Miami, you got Florida State, you got Clemson. So you got three teams that have won the national championship, okay, that are in this league. And there's been years where they've been the most talented league. There's been years where they've had the most NFL draft picks. There's been years where they've had the most winning percentage against a non-conference opponent. And I think a part of that is because they are in the same region as the SEC. A lot of people forget that. I mean, you've got so many in-state schools that are in one or the other conference. You got Florida State, you got Florida, you got South Carolina, you got Clemson, you got Georgia Tech, you got Georgia, you got Louisville, you got Kentucky. All right, so these teams are in the same battlegrounds. These are the guys that got the same fertile recruiting areas, and any given year they could have a roster that's as talented as an SEC team, especially some of the teams that Eddie mentioned. Okay, it hasn't been that way in the last few years. The only team that's had a roster like that is Clemson, but you wonder if it's ever going to come back. I mean, Miami's sitting down there in South Florida, so far away from any other school, with all those players right in their backyard. That was always an advantage for them because, I mean, people don't understand how far. I mean, it's a 7 or 8 hour drive from Tallahassee to Miami. Okay, and Miami is got all those guys, and the nearest school to them is Florida, which is like a 3 or 4 hour drive, and then the next nearest is Florida State. Like I said, it's a 7 or 8 hour drive. So I think this league has talent in their backyard. It'd be interesting if they can keep it in their own state and keep it at their program. I think one school that's doing that right now is North Carolina. I mean, for years the state of North Carolina has been an extremely talented state, but the kids haven't stayed in state. Tennessee's gotten a lot of their players out of the state of North Carolina. And when Eddie and I were at Florida State, Florida used to go up there and get some of the best players out of state of North Carolina. And now you bring in a really good recruiter in Mac Brown, and he's getting those in-state kids to stay and to go to North Carolina, and he's reaping the rewards of that because they have an excellent team this year, and they're a real contender to win the championship. I think, they're probably the second best team in the ACC this year behind Clemson. So just an overview is they have been down the last couple of years, but don't forget, this program's had teams that have won national championships, and this is in a fertile recruiting area, and any given year they could bounce back and do some great things.
Well, I think they got a chance early in the season when you got Clemson, Georgia, and you got Miami, Alabama to make a statement, that we're here. And, you got, two of the, argument, which we talked about last week. You think you got the two best SEC schools opening up with ACC schools. Obviously Clemson is the bell cow, and then Miami's not a dome now. They're Miami, right? So they got players, and as Eddie knows in the South Florida recruiting world, but they walk out, they can throw hit a driver outside the front door, and they can hit about 15 ballers. It's I've always said this, and like I remember back when Snellenberg was there and they had the state of Miami. You drew a line, and that's what they did, and that's where they come from. I think Manny's local. Manny's trying to do that. I think when you get the talent to stay, again, I think Miami is definitely one of those schools. If you could get somebody in there and you just leave them alone, let them go build something, I think it could be unbelievable. And I think you got to, from a recruiting standpoint, and we've said this before, it's not about who's coaching them, it's about the players. Players make great coaches, and I think if they just let them go, let's don't get too upset with them. Let's let them go get players and let them do their thing. I think that would be big. So, all right, DJ, we'll kick it with you since we started with Eddie last time. Let's get your surprise team, your contenders, and your winner from the ACC.
My surprise team is Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech, I think Jeff Sims is a good player, and they're transitioning from a option style offense, and so they are recruiting players that now fit their system, and they've been recruiting very well. And I think people are overlooking them. I don't think they understand how long it takes to change from that type of system and to change your roster from that type of system. And I think that they're going to do some good things this year, and I'd be watching out for them for sure. I think my contender is North Carolina. Like I mentioned, Sam Howell, he's a Heisman Trophy candidate. Mac Brown has been recruiting incredible. I think that they were a few games last year from really doing some great things. I think that people have them on their radar, but they're going to be even better this year than they were last year. And they're going to be a big-time contender in the ACC. And, of course, the team that's going to win it is Clemson. Clemson is right now head and shoulders above the other teams in the ACC. They just have a roster that is extremely talented. They can compete with anybody. They've had a continuity in their coaching staff that is uncommon in college football these days. I mean, they have all the pieces, and the tell all, like you said, is going to be how they play against Georgia in week 1. But I mean, DJ Ukulele is every bit as talented as anybody out there, and they're just going to be a tough team to deal with.
All right, Eddie, what you got?
I've got surprise in the Atlantic Division. I've got FSU, and I just think Norvell is a really, really good coach. I think that Mackenzie Milton, the quarterback, depending on if he comes back, they need better quarterback play. But I think the biggest thing is if they can improve on the O-line. They just have to. But that would be my surprise team in the Atlantic, and then in the Coastal it would be Virginia Tech. I just, you can't leave those guys out of it, I think Fuentes is a really good coach, and that would be my surprise in the Coastal. Contenders, I think NC State. They got 9 returners coming back on defense, and I think that they'll have a chance there. And then Miami on the other side.
Wow.
All going to depend on the quarterback. If that quarterback comes back, because I think he's a great competitor, they'll surround him with a lot of people, And just going back to Miami real quick, I was at Miami, and so was Deej, and when they got rid of the Orange Bowl, they had no chance, because I think that the facilities, and I think that's the thing that really hurts them, and why Miami's not a powerhouse anymore, and all the other reasons that you talked about too. But that was just the mystique there was incredible. I think North Carolina is also a big-time contender, just for all the reasons DJ said, what Mac Brown's doing, their quarterback, and Clemson's the winner. But I will say this, Clemson's got to get better on the back end, and Venables will get that done. But if you watch them late in the year, and you watch the back end, that was not Clemson football. And I think Venables will have that fixed, and I think they'll be unbelievable, especially with that D-line.
Well, I'm fixing both of y'all got me just a little bit on my thunder here, but my surprise team in the ACC is the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, just on what DJ said. Look, Jeff Collins freaking can recruit now. And when you're starting, he fought like the double penalty, right? So he probably was down scholarships and in a completely different system. Like, you just don't roll out and go from running the triple option to running spread football. And it takes time. I mean, completely different players. I mean, that's like going and recruiting a football player to play college basketball. Completely different game. And so he's coming up when he's got some time. He's starting to get his guys in there. He has been recruiting. Not only are they recruiting well, they're evaluating well. With Pat Suddas is a good friend of mine. That's the GM or director of player personnel, whatever he is there. They are evaluating well and recruiting well both. Okay. And then Brent Key, who is the offensive line coach there, can recruit his ass off too. He's been a great recruiter from wherever he's been, and they've done a great job in getting there. And I think with those three guys, recruiting and they have great coaching staff, great energy. I actually I need to confess a little bit. So this past weekend, I took my kids. I had not had a chance. I coached AJ McCarron in high school. I hadn't had a chance to see him play in the NFL. So I took him to the Falcons game on Friday night in Atlanta, and Jeff was there with the football team. Like the football players, they're having a good time. The kids are having a good time. They're at the football game watching. So I'm telling you, I'm looking out for them to be my surprise team. All right, my contender. I'm with you too, though. I wanted to say a little bit Virginia Tech. I think they're going to surprise some people this year as well. My contender is going to be the Clemson Tigers because my winner is going to be the North Carolina Tar Heels for the reason you just said, Eddie. I think Mac Brown, what they're doing, recruiting and evaluating there at North Carolina, he's got some big-time ball players there. They're going to be explosive on offense, and I think they're going to get in a shootout. And because of where the back end is at Clemson, that they don't have that problem in North Carolina on the receiver side and quarterback side. I think they outscore them. I think this is the year because you got to look at this now. It's like you got a new quarterback coming in. He's talented now. He's already got his Dr. Pepper commercial. He's ready to go. He is a talented kid, but he's had one start. And then he's like, you think about this. His first start was on the road against Notre Dame. His second start's going to be in Charlotte against Georgia. This kid, I mean, if it don't go well for him and he's going 0-2 out the gate, you can start seeing confidence issues and things like that. I don't know, man. I just think what Mac Brown's doing, I don't know why. I mean, on paper, I know what it looks like, but I think they're going to do it this year. I think they're a very good team. I think they're going to score a lot of points. And they also have one of my favorite receivers that I've ever evaluated, a kid named Josh Downs at receiver that can really play. Man, I think they're going to do it, man. I think this is the year.
North Carolina scares me a little bit on defense. They gave up 18-plus plays of over 40 yards.
Oh, yeah.
They have to, like you said, it's got to be a shootout. But, man, I don't know. I think
I'll put it like this. When it comes around, I'm taking North Carolina when we pick them that week. So whenever that is, I'll maybe taking the points. I won't be taking the money line. I'll probably be taking the points. But I'm with you though. I mean, on paper it looks like a crazy pick, but I don't know why. They've done consistently have been putting together classes of great evaluated classes. May not be winning what the recruiting rankings say, but we know how that goes. But they have been evaluating and really good football players, and they continue to. The kids they got committed this year are really good players. It really was a thing for me. Is every time when he first got there, I'd kind of find a guy or somebody. I'd be like, well, who likes this? Who's recruiting this guy? Well, it's North Carolina. I was like, God dang! It's like they're kind of like, they seem to be on everybody. So that'll be interesting to see how that goes. So,
I mentioned, that state is an extremely talented state that people may not realize with talent. I mean, they're really, really talented.
Very underrated. You know what I mean? Like, you think it's in the Southeast and everybody, you initially go to your states, but they often forgot about it. I'm with you, DJ. Very talented area.
South Spurrier did it, right? South Carolina, North Carolina. He crushed them for a while.
Yeah, and like I said, Tennessee got a lot of players out of North Carolina, too.
Georgia.
Yeah, Georgia's gotten a lot of players out of North Carolina. I think as a college coach, we've all said, if North Carolina or North Carolina State could keep their in-state players, then they could be real contenders. I mean, that's been something that people have talked about for years, So
yeah, that's the thing. Is it's kind of like and Eddie's been here, but it's the same thing with Mississippi, right? I mean, the whole trick to Mississippi is keeping the in-state players here. Now the problem is you're battling Mississippi State, and then but Mississippi is such a different state than. But everybody says the same thing. Mississippi is such a different state than every other state in the union to where, there's very few players that you sign out of high school that are ready to play like right now. I mean, there are some, but most of them it's a developmental state. The kids come out, but they turn into freak shows, and that's why you've seen a lot of guys that that leave the state, go to programs where they not used to developing players, or used to having ready-made players, and they don't make it very long. You have to have patience. But as you can, I mean, Eddie, y'all the guys that y'all signed when y'all were here in the Tubbs years, man. I mean, and you just think about it's like our guy Ed Orgeron, man. I mean, he they ran him out of here, but I mean, he had some dudes that he left behind. And the next coach benefits from it, And you look at what happened with the next coach when he came in here. He got him up to the number one team in the country pretty quick. And so this state's full of them, man. And it's like with North Carolina, it's like like you're saying, DJ. The problem is that all those kids leave, and you don't even realize that these players are from North Carolina,
right?
Because they go somewhere else, you don't even realize it. But they're everywhere. Charlotte, I mean, I've been to Charlotte, and there's players everywhere. And I was almost shocked the first time I went through there. So, but next week, we got two things coming next week. Two big things coming. We got the Pac-12, and our DJ's technically our Pac-12 and our Big 12 expert. I mean, you're just
I've coached in both leagues. Yep, I'll take it.
So you're going to be fired up about next week, and then also next week, we got the first college football game. So we're going to have our preseason picks, okay, on the spread next week. We'll have our preseason picks. It won't count towards the record. We'll just get warmed up, okay? We actually do have one Big Ten game next week, Nebraska, Illinois. And then you got like UTS or UTEP and New Mexico State, but Hawaii and somebody, UCLA, Hawaii, UCLA. So we got some games next weekend that we'll dip into, but we look forward to it. Guys, thank you so much. And until next time, take care.
Yeah, thank you.
See you guys. Thank you.